was going to talk about mothering and how we all can mother ourselves and each other. And what I decided to do is just really honor mothers. You know, mothers are, mothers are the hand that rocks the cradle. You know, that was a poem written by a man in the 1800s, William Wallace, that praises mothers and motherhood as the primary force for changing the world. Now, can you imagine that? It's the primary, mothers are the primary force that changes the world. Now, I see some fathers on there. We do not want to discount y'all. But if it wasn't for the mothers, you wouldn't be fathers. So there you go. And in June, I'll talk about fathers. But it's so important as mothers to be good mothers and strive to be good mothers. And, the reason that I went into the alcoholism field is my mother was a severe alcoholic and prescription drug addict. And she couldn't be a mother. And she was an orphan. Her mother died when she was young. And on a certain level, I think my mother was jealous that her children had a mother. I know that sounds sick, but my mother was mentally ill besides having alcoholism and prescription drug addiction. I think that she didn't like that we had a mother and she didn't. And so she didn't do much mothering. She couldn't because of her addiction. So that's really the reason I wanted to go into the alcoholism field, to work with families, particularly mothers, women who are alcoholics. It's one thing to have a father that's an alcoholic, and that can be severe. You know, my children lived in alcoholism for years until their father, thank God, found recovery. And, when he passed away, he had 32 years of sobriety. But what really made a difference in their lives is when I found Al-Anon Family Group and stayed there for 14 years. Stayed there, still am there, but I was there 14 years before my husband ever went to his first AA meeting. It was almost like God had to get me out of the way before he could, even attempt to work with my husband, or that my husband would even want sobriety. And that's his business. I don't know that. But anyway, that's the reason I went into the field, because it is for children to be raised by alcoholic mothers. It's horrendous. And if any of you are out there that are alcoholic and you're a mother, and if you are practicing a disease of the alcoholism or an eating disorder, I hope you'll listen with both ears. Because you cannot do much mothering when you are mothering your addiction. When you're putting all your focus on your addiction, there's not a lot of time left for your children. I'd give anything if someone had taken me out of the home back then, but people couldn't recognize the disease of alcoholism. They didn't know. So I went into the field, like I said, primarily to work with families and primarily to work with children. And how you work with children is you help get their parents sober. Parents that are in any addiction, I don't care what the addiction is, that's where their focus is. It's not on their children. And I got to thinking this morning about my own mother. Yes, she was a drug addict and, an alcoholic. But she also had an eating disorder, and we didn't know what an eating disorder was back then. I got to thinking this morning, my mother went from 90 pounds to 210 pounds and 180 pounds and back to 100 pounds. Being in the field, I would suspect that she was anorexic and a compulsive overeater, And the reason I, didn't ever recognize it is because I wanted to be thin like her, but she didn't stay thin very long. She'd eat herself back up to 200 or 210, and she would joke about it. And she'd tell me about my own weight. She'd say, laugh and the world laughs with you. Of cry and you cry alone. I cried a lot about my weight and about the, being made fun of as a child, overweight and all. So anyway, I want to direct this talk absolutely to honor mothers, but also if there is anyone that is practicing any addiction and you have children, we can't sober up or clean up for anyone but ourselves. But, by God, I hope you will take your child or your children into consideration and, and get yourself sober, clean, and sober, or don't be around your child. Give your child away. Now, I feel very strong about that because being raised in by a very sick alcoholic mother. And so, anyway, I'll get off that bandstand. And I do want to honor mothers and really talk about what it takes to be a good mother. And I will tell you, as a mother myself, I made some decisions early on that I wanted children. And I don't know where I came up with the idea that I wanted 4 boys. But God knew different, and He gave me 1 boy, 1 son, and 3 daughters. And I'm very grateful that He did. Now, my 3 daughters think that I've always loved that son more than I have them, which I haven't, but they've always called him the golden child, that he's up on a pedestal, and Mama loved him better than us because she let him always have the center cinnamon roll. He got to get the center cinnamon roll, or he got to get the white meat of the chicken, whatever. I mean, when they all get together and tell their stories, it's quite funny, and we all laugh. I love to listen to my grown adult children talk about their childhood. Because, there wasn't dysfunction, and the main dysfunction was me. I mean, I was a good mother. I was a stay-at-home mother, a good homemaker. I made it my life's work to be a good homemaker and involved in everything that my children did. And, I would have that rage. Something would upset me. My husband would be gone 3 or 4 days and out drunk, and that rage would come up, and I've directed at my children. And I'll spend the rest of my life making amends to my children for that. And the way I make amends is I don't rage anymore. I don't rage at anyone, particularly my children. I just don't. And my kids say, Mother, you are forgiven. So I do take that. And I love to hear them talk about the good things about their childhood. That's all they talk about anymore. And so I just sit and listen. But I want to go over some things that a good mother does to be the best. And we can't ever be the best. We strive for perfection and settle for a little progress. So I want to talk to you about one of the things is to teach our children how to live life to the fullest by letting them be who they are. Teach our children to live life to the fullest and encourage them to be who they are. Now, I will tell you, I did not want my children to grow up the way I did. And, bless my heart, I didn't get to participate in things. But anyway, I wanted my kids to participate in anything they wanted to. And I had my hand on their back. I pushed them in a lot of ways. I don't regret some of that because of the advantages that they had, and they were all smart and all that. But anyway, it is to encourage kids by letting them live their own lives. Don't try to mold them into what you want them to be, but encourage them and encourage them to do things that is maybe outside your comfort zone. And then the second thing is be there for your children when they need you. Now, in today's time, there's a lot more working mothers than there are stay-at-home moms. And there's grandmothers raising children, and there's aunts raising children, and there's dads raising children. But what children need is their needs met. They need their needs met. Now, I don't mean just be at their beck and call. I don't mean about spoiling them. We always say that our grandchildren were never spoiled. They were just well loved. And that's what they were, well loved. my grandson Spencer, he never took to spoiling, but I mean, if a kid could have been spoiled, we would have all spoiled him. But anyway, and then the next thing is teach children to have their own self-worth, and their own self-esteem. And how children get esteemed is from their parents, esteeming them. And if a parent doesn't have their own self-worth and their own self-esteem, that will transfer to those children. They'll grow up not feeling good about themselves because Mama didn't. You know, and she always talked about how bad she was or whatever. And that will go right into the brain and the heart of the child. Don't put yourself down in front of your children. You know, and this is sort of a given, but there's a lot of children in this United States that doesn't have this next thing. This next thing is to provide appropriate food, shelter, and medical. You know, medical, that just sounds medical care. For all of you that I'm looking at right here, that's just a given. But do you know there's children all over this world this morning that they don't have this. They do not have this. So that is just a given for mothers to see that their children have appropriate food, shelter, and medical care. I've worked with a lot of alcoholic women and a lot of drug addict women. Now I'll tell you, when they're into their addiction, and eating disorder women, and when they're in their addiction, they don't give a flip where those kids eat or not. You know, they have a sore throat, oh well, they'll get over it. You know, their focus is not on the children's needs. I've seen it over and over and over and over again. And my belief is those children need to be taken out of homes, whether you would, and I'll tell you, there's not a judge alive working on a bench that will, I mean, the mom has to be pretty bad before a judge will take the child away from the mother, because everyone believes that the mother will give the best care. I will tell you, some alcoholic women and eating disorder women and drug addict women do not need to have the care of their children. That is just my opinion. I've seen too many of them being neglected through, you know, emotional neglect, physical neglect. So anyway, I'm on a roll this morning about alcoholic women, and I love alcoholic women. But I'll tell you, they are hard to work with because they don't see that they have that big a problem. Or eating disorder women, they don't see that it's interfering with their motherhood. Well, I'm here to tell you it is a lot. Because when you're into the food, when you're binging and purging your guts out over that porcelain throne, how much are you thinking about your child? Just think about it. Or when you take that drink, how much are you thinking about your child? So another thing then is be a good example for your children. You know, that's what a good mother does. She sets a pattern. Now, like I said, we're not going to do this perfect, but where are they going to learn? Where is their classroom early on? It is in the home, and they're watching you. They're watching you all the time. My granddaughter was here from Dallas. She's in real estate and she's a surveyor, and she had to come here for work, and she brought her two precious little grandbabies, which that makes me their great-grandmother. And so my son, who never changed a diaper on his children, anyway, he's retired, and so he kept the babies yesterday. So Misty and I went over to help him. And when his daughter came in, I mean, the eyes of those babies just lit up. And I'll tell you, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter's mother, my son, they have two daughters, and I have never seen a better mother than my daughter-in-law. And I can see the parenting that the granddaughter is giving to my great-grandchildren. It's passed on. It is passed on. But I'll tell you, it can stop in one generation. If you have had, if you haven't had good parenting, you can become a good parent. And you can change that generational curse of bad parenting, I promise you. So be a good example. And then another thing is make time to have fun with your kids. Fun is important. Kids need to laugh. They need to see parents laugh. And it breaks that monotony. It breaks the seriousness. Life is serious. Absolutely, it's serious. You know, we're just coming through, hopefully, toward the end of a pandemic. That's been hard. But I have heard from people and have seen, you know, on Facebook and things where it has drawn people closer together. And one of the things that I've seen is they do a lot of fun things. They've done, you know, now you can wear that out and it's kind of time for us to all get back to, you know, to some normalcy. But, you know, a good mother has fun with their kids. You know, one of the things that my kids love to talk about is when it would snow, they'd put me, it was one of the times that I'd lost weight, and they would put me on this makeshift sled thing that they had made, and they'd pull me all the way down this little road. Anyway, I got out and played with the kids. I'd never played as a kid, so I really didn't know how to play. My children taught me how to have fun, and they still do. They still teach me how to have fun, and my grandchildren do. So then another thing is allow room for your children to make mistakes. You know, kids are going to make mistakes. I don't care what age they are. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to forget their homework. They're going to leave the books at school. They're going to, you know, be driving, just get their license, and they're going to be stopped and get a ticket. They're going to do things that is, you know, the brain doesn't fully form till we're 25. So cut your kids some slack when they make mistakes. But guess what? They're not mistakes. You know, our children are not mistakes, but they're not going to do things perfect. And when we expect that, we're setting ourselves up in them. Cut them some slack. And then along with that, what is going to happen is you're going to teach them about forgiveness. Yeah, if it's something that they've done, you're going to have to address it. If you don't, you're not a good parent. You know, you need to address it. But also, you know, that behavior needs to, you know, some of the behavior needs to change. And what we need to do as parents is to forgive them of whatever mistake they've made. And don't keep bringing it up and rubbing their noses in it and reminding them, well, you remember when, blah, 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 you know. So forgiveness. And then a good mother teaches their children about unconditional love, unconditional positive regard. I grew up in a household. My dad would have made Archie Bunker look like a saint. He was the most racist man I've ever known, ever. And he was very white complected, blonde-headed, blue-eyed, and that's all he liked. Was white skinned people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Look at me. I took after my mother. I had dark skin, black hair, black eyes. And he never called me by name. He called me the black baby. And today I would look at that as abuse. I mean, really would, because he never knew my name. And so we need to teach our children unconditional love. You know, that everyone is worthy of love. Now, do we want to stay grouped up around unlovely people all the time? No. You know, if we're around people that are hard to get along with or that are not appropriate to be around, you know, like what Jesus would do. You know, he would go to people and he would stand with them and stand with them and stand with them. And then when he got it that they did not want what he had, he wouldn't keep standing there and try to talk them into it. The Bible says, and I'm not a Bible. Anyway, what the Bible says is that he would shake the dust off of his sandals. He would bless them. He would turn around and walk away and leave them to their misery. So, in teaching kids about unconditional love, we can love people unconditionally, but we don't have to be best friends and, you know, be with them all the time. My friend Misty teaches her children, you know, because there's kids learn from each other. They learn more from each other than they learn from parents. And what Misty, I hear her telling her children is, you be the change. You be the instigator of good and not the instigator of bad. Is that what you say, Misty?
Be the influencer and not influenced.
Be the influencer.
Don't be influenced.
And don't be influenced. I think that's good information to teach children. You know, it's not about avoiding everybody in the world or the different kids in the classroom, but be the influencer by changing, you know, their own behavior. Okay, and so in that is that love is the answer for anything. Love is a verb, it's an action word. You can tell people till hell freezes over, I love you, but if you don't show it, it doesn't mean anything. Love is an action word. And sometimes we need to love our children in ways that they won't like. You know, love them enough to keep them safe. That's really the man that wrote this poem, what he says in the poem, that really a mother's job is to help their children stay alive. And if you're a mother or a dad, that's not always easy. I mean, you know, to keep your children alive. We had a 2-story house, and I have one child. I have several children, but Kim was the one that danced to a different tune. And there was a big tree outside of our 2-story house, and from the time she was a little bitty thing, she had climbed up that tree and get up there on top of that house. Well, I weighed over 280 pounds. I couldn't get her off of that house. And I knew that wasn't safe for her to be up there, you know. But all the encouragement that I gave her wouldn't keep her from getting on top of the house. You know, and kids do survive, but a lot in their growing up. That's our job as parents, is to keep them alive. And like I said, sometimes it's not easy, you know, to just keep them safe. And that keeping them safe is to keep them out of harm's way. Keep them away from people that are not good for them. You know, because I am a survivor, any type of childhood abuse is near and dear to my heart. If you've got relatives that you know that have some kind of a history of abuse, and you allow your children to be around them, your children need to be taken away from you. If you're not keeping them safe by keeping them away from unsafe people, you know, I feel pretty strong about this. If you know that they have harmed a child in any way and haven't gotten help, and you take your children around them, those kids need to be taken away from you. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Love is a verb, and sometimes we have to take action. And then to show your children love in little small ways, like putting notes in their lunch boxes. My kids got to talking the other day about the notes that a lot of times that was the first thing they want to see is the note that and I believe I put a note in their lunches until they graduated from high school. That's my memory. But I love to do that. I loved it. And sometimes I would think that they didn't even notice. And then I would, you know, see maybe on their desk or something, all of them piled up, or they might be in an envelope. They saved it. And it was just a small gesture to, you know, on my part to do that. And then another thing that is so important, and this is important with really anyone that we are around, but mothers need to be consistent. You know, say what you mean and mean what you say. You know, kids know that they can work you, particularly if you don't keep your word. When you're not being consistent, when you tell them no about something and they keep on and on and on and on and on, and you finally give in just to make them shut up, what you're teaching them is you can get your way just by keeping on, keeping on, keeping on. So be consistent. If you're not going to hold up your no, don't say it. Don't say it. Because that indicates to them that they can wear anybody down enough to get what they want, to get their way. So consistency. it is one of the best ways to make your children feel safe too. I mean, this is back to safety. And you know, as much as kids don't sometimes like a routine, they thrive on it. Children thrive on routines. They might act like they don't. Teenagers will act like it more. You know, teenagers are, I always say that children are self-centered. I mean, they're born that way because all their needs come from outside themselves. The only other thing that's any more self-centered is a teenager. And I know some of you have raised teenagers. Teenagers think the whole blamed world revolves around them, and they don't know the word no. And if you haven't told them no in childhood, if you've given them their way about everything, you've crippled your child. But now put it on them. You know, as they get older, it's up to them to make these decisions. Of, you know, if they want to live a consistent life and keep their word and, you know, integrity and all that. But children thrive, I'm going to repeat this, thrive with routine. And then it's good to have a day off. It's good to have a weekend. And kids need some free time to do whatever they want to do. You know, as a child, and I hate to just keep bringing my own childhood up, but it was a hard childhood. I was the mother, I was the housekeeper, I was the cook, I was blah, blah, blah. And the only thing I wanted to do was that we had this one kind of overstuffed chair, and I wanted to sit in that chair sideways and dangle my legs off of the arm of that chair. That's all I wanted to do, just sit and dangle my legs off the side of the chair. And Mother would be laying on the couch. And she would say things like, get up, get the lead out. Go do, I mean, I hated that. Get the lead out, get the lead out. You know, go clean that back porch. Go do this, go do that. It was like I could never just do nothing. And children need times to just do nothing. They get tired. It takes a lot of energy for children. They burn up a lot of energy and they get tired. And so it takes a lot of rest. Toddlers and teenagers need about the same amount of rest because they are burning up so much energy on the inside. You know, they're growing, teenagers and toddlers. Okay, so then what a good mother is they're fierce. And I see some mothers on here that are very fierce. You know, fierce means you wear those mama bear t-shirts. You are a mama bear on the inside, and boy, nobody better mess with your little baby bears. You know, now you can say what you want to the children, you know, if they act up or something, but you don't want anybody else to. It's not anybody else's business, you know. And if those children are abused in any way, that fierceness comes out, and, you know, the mothers wear those Mama Bear t-shirts with pride. You know, there's a little story about that I used to tell all the time. I love the story about, you know, if you want to know how to raise children, look at nature. Watch animals. I liked the story about the mama bear. You know, they usually have two at a time. So this mama bear had two cubs born at the same time, twin cubs. And so what parents' job is, the only job that we have with kids is to teach them how to live out there in the real world. And that's our job, is to teach them how to live out there in the real world. So these little cubs were up, you know, let's say they were teenagers, you know, getting ready to leave home. But through the years, those months that they were younger, she would take them through the forest, and she would show them which berries were good to eat. And if they started to reach for the poisonous one, she'd take that paw and slap their hand. And so they learned to, you know, which berries were safe and which were poisonous by the mother teaching them. And then she'd take them down to the river and teach them to watch for fish, and, you know, how the fish would come down the river, and to stay real quiet and stand there and just see this fish, and then take that paw and go in there and pick up a fish. And they had lunch. So she taught them how to fish. and get their lunch. And then she would take them to an opening, and she would have them to look around, and she would say, I want you to look around and see the danger. And they couldn't see the danger, but the mother way off in the distance could see a mountain line. The mother could see a mountain line way off in the distance. And so she would teach them, when you see a mountain line, you find the tallest tree that you can find and crawl up there. So she was teaching them how to keep themselves safe, how to keep themselves fed, you know, and in the winter she'd show them the cave that they were born in. You go in that cave and you sleep all winter. So she taught them how to take care of themselves. So after she had taught them all that she knew to teach them, one day she took them to that opening that had this tall tree. She took them to the opening, and she said, now y'all just stay right here and I'll be back, or I'll see you. And so she left, and those little cubs were there, and they kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and Mother never came back. She never did come back. And then they got to fussing. Well, she would come back, except she was mad at you. You acted out this morning. And they got to fighting. The two of them got to fighting because they thought the other one had made the mother not come back, not want to be with. So they got to fighting and fussing and pulling their fur off of each other till they were exhausted. And they were exhausted, and they laid down on the ground and they slept. And the next morning they woke up and they were hungry. And they went out and they picked up some good berries. They went down to the river and got them some fish to eat. They saw a mountain lion. They climbed a tree. They took care of themselves. A lot of people will not teach children that. And what that mother bear taught them is I'm going to teach you everything I know, then I'm going to let you go. And that's where a lot of humans, we don't know how to let go of children. So, you know, these little cubs stayed mad at her for a long time. That old heifer, he just went off and left them. And so they stayed puffed up and mad at her, you know. But then they found mates, and they kind of went off their separate lives, and then they had cubs of their own. And one day they saw their mama walking through the forest, her head held high, and she nodded at them, and they nodded at her. And she knew she had done a good job. That's what healthy parenting is. You know, it's not wrapping our kids up and wanting them to be with us every single solitary second. It's about, you know, that's one of the things that I did with my children. And sometimes, you know, we can take it into that thing to the extreme. But I wanted my children to know that they did not ever have to stay home and take care of me. And they don't now. They do not have to take care of me. I'm very sufficient. They want to in their adult life, but I wanted to raise my children with an outstretched hand where they could go on and live their own life. In my mother's sickness, she couldn't give me that. Hers was, stay with me. If you don't, I will die. That is a bad, bad message to give to a child. And I was always afraid to leave. I mean, I did leave and pretty early, but I was always afraid every time that phone rang that my mother was dead and I'd caused it because I'd left home. That is sickness. Okay, so consistency. Be consistent to keep your kids safe. My husband's first sponsor came and he made us around the kitchen table, not the big dining room table, but the kitchen table. And he would meet us and to talk with us about how to raise kids. Of course, he didn't have any, and I knew a lot more about raising kids than he ever thought about. But we listened to him because he was my husband's sponsor. And what he told Ariel was, he said, you be consistent with your kids. If you are an SOB to them, be a consistent SOB. You know, if you're going to be strict, be strict. If you're going to be, you know, anyway, he said consistency is the best thing. Of course, the best thing is not to be an SOB with your kids, but let them know what they can count on, what they can count on. So the and then, I've already done that. And then, so the next thing that mothers have to be is to be brave. Be brave. Being a mother is not for the weak of heart. It is the hardest job. Misty's standing here with her head shaking her head. It's the hardest job anyone will ever have. I get so amazed at clients. Yeah, they come in and they, on a certain level, they love their mothers. But there's a joke around here, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. I've never had a client yet that somehow, some way, blamed whatever their problem was. Well, after all, my mother, blah, 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 my mother. Dads get a hall pass. I'll tell you, they'll put those dads on a pedestal. They don't want to talk about, well, he loved us. Well, hell, he wasn't ever there. What do you mean? But a child wants time with their father so bad. They have that father hunger, particularly women with eating disorders have that father hunger, that longing for fathers. And, oh yeah, there's my mother. And, they don't give a lot of, particularly when they're young or particularly if they're addicts. They don't appreciate mothers till they sober up and they realize, she's the one that's been keeping the home fires burning. There is, there's no perfection in being a parent, and there's no perfection at all in being a mother. But there is nothing more blessed, or to have a blessing, than for a child to have a good mother. There was a woman that used to speak in Al-Anon, her name was Blanche, and she would talk about sponsorship. And she said, the way you pick a good sponsor is the way a husband needs to pick, the way a woman needs to pick a good husband. When you start to pick a good husband, find a well-mothered man. If you can find a well-mothered man, and that doesn't mean smothering, but a good mother that taught that son how to take care of himself and how to honor women, you got a winner there. So she said, do that with sponsorship. Find a well-sponsored sponsor. If your sponsor that you're asking doesn't have a sponsor and doesn't work with the sponsor, you go on down that list. You find a well-sponsored sponsor, like finding a well-mothered man to marry. And that could be in reverse too. All right, so be brave. Like I said, being a mom is not for the weak of heart. It's the hardest job anyone will ever do. And it is the most rewarding. We do not need to get our good feelings about ourselves from our kids, but I'll tell you, it's hard not to. I watch Jackie and her kids, excel, and they've launched them out, and they've all are leaving home, and then there's Cora. She's getting ready to have a empty nest, and please, all of us, we need to really support Cora, because right now she's kind of ready for the empty nest. But Jackie can tell you, it's not all fun when they're gone. It's like you look at each other and say, okay, well, now what do we do? Because you spent all these years being a mother and mothering those kids, So change, life is change. Now, sometimes when our kids get off the beaten path, and they become addicts themselves and all, the best thing that a parent can do for an addict child is give them a free rein, and let them know that you're there if they ever want help, that you love them and you care about them, that do not love them to death. So many addicts, the way they afford their addiction is from mama. Not a lot of times from dads, but from mamas, because we just feel so sorry for them, and they say things like, I haven't eaten in 3 days. Addicts lie so much, if their lips are moving, they're lying, if they're practicing an addiction. And so they'll go to mamas, well, I need this, I need that, I need something else, and they'll wiggle into their mother's heart, and mother will give them money, and they go buy drugs, or they go buy booze. If you're doing that and enabling a child of yours to continue in their addiction, go to Al-Anon. I want to say lock yourself up in the house and don't let them in, but anyway, go to Al-Anon and learn to love them and let them go. But let them know that you're there. You'll be there, and mothers stand with kids when nobody else does. And what I mean by that is mothers never give up. Mothers never give up on their children. They don't. I'm looking at a bunch of mothers out here. I don't think mothers ever give up. But if you have an addict child, whether they are teenagers or 40 or 50 years of age, go to Al-Anon. Learn how to love them in a healthy way and support them in their wellness. And I will tell you, addictions have a high rate of relapse. And sometimes parents get worn completely out with their kids relapsing. And if they keep going to treatment, if they keep going on the path, guess what? They have a higher chance of recovery than if they don't. And sometimes they need a little help. And I hear people say, well, we paid for treatment 3 or 4 times. Well, if they had cancer, how many times would you pay for treatment? How many trips would you make to a cancer center? So addictions are diseases. It's the mind, body, and soul. And it's much different than just a physical disease. And so parents get kind of, they need to be educated on how to treat an adult child that's an addict or a young teenager that's an addict. And so get yourself some education and don't love them to death. Love them, but don't love them to death. So I want to close my part with this. The best thing you can do for your family as a mother. Now the Bible says the father needs to be the spiritual head of the family. Guess what? There are some very spiritual fathers, and that they do take that lead. But more than not, the mothers have to take the lead. If the father doesn't take the spiritual lead of the family, then it falls to their mother. And so mothers step up for that. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is invite God every day into the center of your parenting. Invite God into it, and then into your family. One of the things that my Miss Pat taught Ariel and I, she was like our spiritual director, our spiritual leader. And after he sobered up, of course I've been doing this for years, but what she gave him an assignment. She said every morning, before you go to work, or right after you get up, and while Tennie's still there, I want you to take her hand and get on your knees, and together you invite God into the day and into your family. Now, for a man that didn't have much spiritual training growing up, although his stepdad's a Baptist preacher, I don't know, he didn't have much spiritual training. But he followed direction, and it was awkward at first. And he'd hold my hand, and I'd been praying for years. I just wanted to pray, but I kept my mouth shut, and I let him do it. And it was like a child, and I got to watch how he began to change. And I just could love him and support him through that change. And our children benefited from that tremendously because he began to take the spiritual lead in our family. And so I want to end with Proverbs 22:6. It says, sounds like I'm doing a spiritual talk this morning, maybe I am. But it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So have faith. Do not give up, because, it says train up a child in the way that he should go or she should go. And when they're old, they will not depart from it. Now, old could be 30, 35. Maybe they take get off the beaten path and stray. But if you've taught them from the time that they're babies about God and about grace and about forgiveness and about love, if you've done that, that's what kids need, and they will come back to that. I'm in the addiction field, and I can't keep from talking about addictions. But the thing about it, people can recover from addictions. I don't care. And those mothers that have been in and out of treatment, go again. If you're recommended, to stay longer, you stay longer. We had a woman here that I started to call her this morning to ask if I could share her story. I'm not giving you her name. She was here quite a few years ago, had been in and out of treatment, had no desire to recover. Her folks were just sick of her, and they stuck her here. And she had a bad eating disorder, bulimic and anorexic. And she had a young son that had watched her drink and eat and puke and drink and eat and puke. And so she came here, and she was arrogant, and she was angry, and she hated my guts. And we worked with her and worked with her and worked with her. And then during family week, I made no bones about it. I told them, because she hadn't changed any of my family week. I told her parents, I said, if you want your daughter to die, you take her home. If you want her to live, you leave her here for 6 months. And, she's dependent on y'all forever for everything. And, cut off the money. The only thing that, give her is for her to stay 6 months in treatment. And guess what? She did. And she's been sober and clean ever since. And her son is an older teenager, and he's doing fabulous things with his life, and his mother is right there with him, clean and sober and abstinent. That's why we stay in this field, to see the miracles over and over and over. But if those grandparents hadn't listened to us, and that daughter cussed them and hated them for making her stay, she didn't have to stay. She could have got out and gone and get a job, but she stayed, and her life became different, because what she found while she was here was the God of her understanding. Okay, so, as usual, I've stopped sharing and gone to preaching. So I'm want to open it up to y'all. And if you have a mother that is living, be sure and honor her this coming Sunday. If not, honor your mother with your children. Tell them about their grandmother, the good things about their mother. Not all those bad things, but, tell them about what they are missing, because I know some of your mothers are passed, but tell your children about your mother and their grandmother. Okay, who would like to share? Hello?